food and beverage magazine publisher Michael Politz, featuring leaders in the hospitality, branded food and beverage, and CPG industries, many of whom are Jennifer and Michael's friends in the business, for an informal and informative conversation where friends in the business share the latest intel, ideas, and best practices. Live, juicy inside scoop from the tastemakers, newsmakers, bread bakers, drink shakers, spoon lickers, clam diggers, farms, foodies, and friends of the food and beverage magazine world. Here are your hosts, Jennifer English and Michael Politz.
Hey everybody, I'm Jennifer English, editor-at-large of Food and Beverage Magazine. Welcome to another edition of Food and Beverage Magazine Live. I'm here at Copper Penny Distilling, where my friends are launching a beautiful endeavor to make delicious sips in new and ancient traditions. I don't know if you can see the stills behind me. I'll give you a glimpse later on. But there's never been a better time to be an entrepreneur in the world of food and hospitality, drink. And we're certainly going to talk about that. But it's also that wonderful juxtaposition with a generational legacy that we're going to talk about today. We're going to introduce you to somebody who's become really my daily drinker. I didn't think that was going to be possible, but I'm won over by the Don Francisco coffees that were sent to me to try. And personally, I am now the double roast. It's a beautiful, dark, rich morning brew. I make it in my French press. I loved watching the videos where they made French press. What's the best way to make coffee? What's the best way to keep coffee? What's the best way to serve coffee? What's the best way to enjoy coffee? Well, the best way to enjoy it is to find the one that you like the best. And at Food and Beverage Magazine, where our 14 million readers every month who are people in the food and beverage industry, we like to think we know a thing or two. And we like to know that our friends in the business are always the ones to teach us the things to enhance our experience even more. And that's the case today. Lisette Gaviña is here today to talk about her family's multi-generational legacy of making and selecting and roasting coffee. We have some pictures of her forebears, and I have to say, I love the idea that making great coffee is not only their mission and their passion, but it's also the thing that has enabled us to experience a taste of their family as well. You know, I believe that when you pour yourself into the things that you make and you have the intention of love and care, that everything you make tastes better. That's how you can get to irresistible. And I have to say, I have an irresistible cup of coffee in front of me with which to toast our guest. Lisette, welcome. Thank you so much for sending us this delicious coffee and literally changing every day for me, because I now literally make my coffee I have the open pack over here. I'm going to show you what I make. The double French is now my like beautiful addiction. For that, I have to raise my cup to you and say thank you.
Oh my gosh, Jennifer, thank you. That was such a beautiful introduction. I appreciate it. And for you to say that you're such a fan of our coffee is really the best compliment you can give me. So thank you.
There's something really distinctive about your house style. It's purely delicious coffee when you brew it the right way. And I have to say, there's been no disappointments in tasting through the line. Everything is just clean. It makes a really bright, rich, flavorful cup. It's just great coffee. There is now a spectrum of coffee. People have gotten into roasting in all different styles. And I appreciate it's all out there, but we almost have to go back to what coffee is and what it should taste like. And I thought maybe we could start there today. What is coffee and what should it taste like? And when do we get so far away? I mean, we can get there, but what should coffee taste like? Because if you ask me, I'd say this is what coffee should taste like.
Thank you. Well, I think a lot of us forget, or maybe we don't even realize that coffee is a natural beverage. You know, coffee is the seed of a cherry that grows on a bush, and that cherry has to be harvested by hand. And then that cherry goes through a process to remove the skin. And then that coffee is roasted and packed and then delivered to the consumer. But, you know, coffee is one ingredient. I mean, and when you actually brew it, it's just the coffee and the water. So maybe it's two ingredients in the end. But you really have to start with a high quality coffee to make a really great cup of coffee. You can't take a bad coffee and make it good. You have to start with, you know, the finest 100% Arabica coffees, which are the coffees that we use across our brands. And they're the most aromatic, the most flavorful coffees in the world. And most of these coffees that we purchase come from Latin America, which are, you know, the most famous coffee producing countries and the best tasting. And we buy the highest qualities from those regions as well. So you can't, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you. I've got 4 bags in front of me. And the first question I'm going to ask is it the same bean in every one of these bags, with the difference being how you roast it?
No, actually, each coffee is its own blend. If it's a blend, if it's a single origin, it's 100% from that country. So all the coffees that you have in front of you are different blends. And it's very similar to, you know, winemaking, I would say, you know, where you're trying to achieve a certain taste profile. And so you select the components, the different coffees from different origins to make the blend. And then you may experiment with different levels of roasting. Although you may have, let's say, a dark roast in mind, but what's the level of darkness? What's the degree of roast that's going to give that coffee the best flavor? You know, we tend to buy very naturally sweet coffees because that's what we like. And so I think that's why you'll find our dark roasts particularly aren't as charred or as bitter or, you know, pungent as some other dark roasts in the market. They still have that smokiness that you want in a dark roast, but they have a very nice, you know, lingering aftertaste and that you can appreciate.
Can I describe it as we've traded those bitter notes for cocoa notes? Everything else would be very similar, that there is a smokiness to it. There is a really lush, rich, deep flavor, but those cocoa notes are really a nutty, cocoa-ish, chocolate-ish. I see that as sort of wafting and weaving its way through each of the ones that we've tried. Is that an appropriate way to describe that?
Yes, I think that you're spot on. I mean, we say dark chocolate or, you know, chocolatey, but cocoa, I think it's the same thing because it's not the sweet chocolate, but a little bit of the bitterness of it, but the roundness, you know, that you get of a nice cocoa or chocolate.
When you say that, you know, some of these blends will identify on the bag as a medium dark roast or a dark roast, what does that mean, light, medium, and dark roast?
Well, there actually is a spectrum. There's a machine called an Agtron where you can determine the actual level of roast. There's a scale, you know, between, you know, the scale goes from 60, let's say 75 on the high to 20 on the low. 20 is the darkest, and 75 would be the lightest. And so you can measure, and everything in between, right? So I think that, so that definitely helps you determine what is medium dark, what is dark. There is a standard in the industry. However, there has been, over the years, the weight of that scale has shifted. So as when dark roast coffees were really became popular, you definitely got to see a lot of like the dark end of coffees. And now you've seen the pendulum swing with some other roasters where it's all about light roasts, and you're seeing 70 agtron, 75 agtron coffees, which are almost what we would consider to be under roasted, because it's like anything else, it's like when you think of like an onion, right? There are different degrees that you can cook that onion. You can enjoy it raw, or you can enjoy it, charred.
Yeah. Talk to me about how the relationship between how dark in its roast the flavor is, and is there any truth to the idea that darker roasts have more caffeine and that lighter roasts have less caffeine? Is there any relationship between how dark and rich a coffee is and the caffeine that it carries?
So the degree of roast of the coffee, the darker you roast a coffee, the more bitterness you're creating in that coffee. Coffee's naturally bitter, and some coffees, depending on where they're grown and where they're from, they have even more bitterness. So actually roasting them darker extracts more bitterness. But the level of caffeine in the coffee is native to that plant. So for example, Robusta plants have more caffeine than Arabica plants.
Right.
Caffeine is actually the natural defense mechanism for the coffee plant. It helps protect it. Yeah, it helps protect it from bugs, from, mostly pests that like the coffee tree. So it's even on the leaves of the coffee plant. So, but when you roast that coffee, no matter whether you roast it light or dark, you're not removing any more caffeine from it. But what does happen as you roast coffee darker is it does get lighter. So when you start with a pound of green coffee and you roast it dark, the end result will be 10 ounces of coffee, let's say.
Oh, interesting.
But if you roast it medium, the result will be 12 ounces of coffee. So the weight, even though the volume, there's a weight volume difference that you see. So if you're talking about by volume, no, the coffee shouldn't have more caffeine. But if you're talking about weight, darker roast does have more caffeine.
I am such a coffee nerd. I love all this talk. I know you probably don't get to talk about this all the time, because people just want to know what's the most delicious thing you make, what's the most irresistible coffee I can enjoy. But I love all this. I've actually been studying coffee for years.
Wow.
When I used to have my spice company, we had a custom roast done for us. We even did studies of what's the best way to store coffee so that you can get the maximum amount of flavor. Was it in a whole bean or ground? And so I'm going to pose that question to you, because I know you for generations have been in your family studying the best way to enjoy and keep coffee. What is the best way to keep coffee?
So the best way
like this, for instance.
Yeah, the best way to keep your coffee fresh is, once that bag has been opened, you want to make sure that you store it in an airtight container first, because oxygen is the enemy of coffee. So once that bag is open, the coffee is oxidizing, it's getting stale. And so what we want to try to do is minimize any exposure to oxygen so that the coffee stays fresh. So you want to first put it in an airtight container. And then we actually did studies here too, so I'm curious to see what your findings were. But the question of, do you keep it in the refrigerator or the freezer? So we experimented with both. And our tests showed the results that the freezer is actually the best place to keep your coffee in an airtight container, because, again, there's just less exposure to oxygen in your freezer. If you think about it, you probably use your refrigerator a lot more than you do your freezer.
Well, not only that, we kept it in whole bean in the freezer versus ground in the freezer. Grinding fresh from the freezer, we found, was the best way to do it.
That's absolutely true, because you have less surface area. When those beans are kept whole, there's just less surface area for the oxygen to oxidize the coffee. So that's absolutely true.
As you can see, I've got two different size glasses in front of me. These are my from my cocktail collection of
I love those.
vintage barware. I thought it would be fitting to come to Copper Penny Distilling to share this with you. And what I've done is I've put a little bit more of the breakfast blend in the bigger of the 2 cocktail cups, and then the Mayan blend. Because to my mind, these two, in addition to the double French, which I've told everybody is already my daily drinker, what I really like about these two, and we'll talk a little bit about their aroma in a minute as well as their flavor, but for a morning blend like this, it's really delicious. And I find that I can drink a little bit more of it. And then the Mayan blend has some really unusual flavor notes that make it such a great after dinner sip. And what I've done is I serve this not hot, but I serve it room temperature as a cocktail with food. And I really think there's a lot to be said for rediscovering the pairability of a great black coffee with savory foods in the morning like breakfast, or even some of the sweeter things like pancakes or a cinnamon bun. And then for dessert with these pumpkin pie, and I saw you have a pumpkin pie coffee. But one of my all-time favorite flavor combinations is an irresistible peanut butter cookie with black coffee just like this. And what it does is that bitter note really plays so nicely with that nutty, sweet peanut cookie. It just is one of the great flavor combinations, I think. But let's get into making some coffee together. I've got my French press ready. I've got my boiling water here. I've got my kettle. Let's start with the breakfast blend.
Okay.
How did we become a nation of morning coffee drinkers? Where does that come from?
You know, that's a good question. I honestly don't know 100% accurate answer to that. But I mean, the U.S.'s history with coffee actually begins in Boston, which I think you are a native of Boston, right? Beantown. So it all, thanks to the British and those taxes on tea, coffee became the beverage of choice of the United States after the Boston Tea Party. So, and I would imagine that it became a morning brew because it's one of those beverages that just helps you get going in the morning. You know, it's warm, it's comforting, gives you the energy that you need. So that's my guess. What do you think?
I think you're spot on with that. But what's really interesting is how we become a nation of coffee lovers. It's a really interesting trend to watch happen. And I'm going to make another parallel. If you watch the rise of Starbucks and you watch the rise of our appreciation for wine in this country, isn't it interesting that we began to develop and then cultivate our appreciation for the flavor profiles of great wines, for the customs and the rituals around it, the same way we've expanded our experience with coffee? I think there's a really interesting track that parallels between wine and coffee. And then it makes perfect sense that if we're enjoying different wines that have, bitter notes and astringent notes and fruity and floral and tobacco and chocolate and coffee notes and leather notes, that if we began really loving those things, I guess we always did, doesn't it make sense that we'd look for those things elsewhere? And when we discovered that we could have those kinds of satisfactions in something as available to us as a great coffee, to me, that explains a lot.
I think that's so insightful, Jennifer. I mean, you're absolutely right. As consumers, we have greater appreciation for different foods and beverages. Of course, it's going to have a ripple effect, into other things. And consumers have, really gotten into coffee, especially with the pandemic. A lot of us are drinking coffee, more and more coffee at home. And people are really upping their coffee game, trying out different blends, investing in a really nice grinder. A lot of espresso machines for the home were sold during the time period. Everybody's perfecting their espresso shots. And it's really fun and exciting to see that people are so into coffee.
Let's talk a little bit about your family, and then we're going to give these a sniff. I've actually got some of the Mayan in the French press here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour my water in before it gets too cold. I hope you can still see the steam coming off of this, because this to me is perfection.
We can't quite see it, the steam, but
Okay. It's because it's right off camera. I apologize.
No, it's okay.
So I am using my Bodum.
Oh, there it is.
There's a little bit of steam for you. So I like these. They're not really expensive. I think these are found 15 to 20 bucks online. Go with Bodum. They're a really terrific company. They've been mastering the art of French pressing, as they say, for quite a while.
Yeah.
And it's a really versatile thing, and you can make as little as 1 or 4 cups if you're having a dinner. I think this is not as customizable if you have like all the little pods, but I love that this goes back to a more hands-on tradition and an almost ancient tradition. I also love the way French press coffee tastes. It has a little bit more of that oil and the richness and all the things I really do love about the flavors of the coffee that you sent us. How do you make coffee at home, Lisette?
Can you hear me?
There you are. We lost you for a second. Thank you for staying with us. How do you make coffee at home?
Oh my gosh, you should see my coffee bar.
You have a whole coffee bar.
I mean, I'm a coffee person, so I make coffee so many different ways. And but I always start my day with an espresso. And usually, my husband is the one that makes coffee at home in the morning. Of course, he's a really good barista, I have to say. But yeah, I start my day with an espresso. On the weekend, I love to make pour over. It just takes a little bit more time, and I love to grind the beans. Grinding the beans right before you brew is always just makes that coffee much more flavorful, much more aromatic, more tasty.
And I want to say, Peugeot still makes a hand crank coffee bean grinder. And Peugeot grinders, maybe I'm a little partial because I used to do business with them regularly, but they are the best.
No, they are. We have a few of those around here. Here, let me show you. There's an antique grinder right behind me. Although this one, I think it's American. It's not Peugeot, but we have a lot of these around here.
What's funny is one of my very, very first jobs in food was when I was 15 or 16 years old. I was a checker at the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, otherwise known as the A&P Market.
Oh my God.
And A&P was one of the last places that I knew of that had a coffee bean grinder in the store, and they had a coffee called 8 o'clock coffee, and I remember regularly helping customers grind their beans. I didn't appreciate how delicious it was. I had to have lots of milk and sugar in it, but I remember how passionate people were. There was a small coffee culture then. Now it's everywhere. And we have your family in part to thank for that. This is a great time. Let's talk a little bit about your family. And I want to say this is Food and Beverage Magazine Live. We're talking with Lisette Gaviña Lopez, who is one of the members of her family that are the Don Francisco coffee family, from whom we get so much of the best coffee that we enjoy today. Here's a picture of some of your ancestors. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yes. So here you have my grandfather in the middle. His name was Francisco Gaviña. So our Don Francisco's brand is named in his honor. And then he is joined there by his 4 children. So from left to right, you have my dad, Jose, then Leonor, then Pedro, and then Paco. So my aunt and uncles. And together, they're the ones that, of course, with my grandmother's support, started this business, our family business in 1967 in Los Angeles. We've been roasting coffee in LA for over 50 years. However, my family has been in the coffee business for over 150 years. Wow. For 4 generations. We have dedicated our lives to coffee. We first started as coffee growers in Cuba with my great-grandfather. And my grandfather was born on our family's coffee farm. And that's where he learned to not only cultivate coffee, but also roast coffee. And our family was in the coffee business almost 100 years in Cuba before the revolution.
Oh, wow.
And after the revolution, my family fled Cuba through Spain and then eventually settled in Los Angeles. And that's where we started our lives over. And, we didn't know anything about the American coffee market when we got here. For us, coffee is espresso. That's what we drink.
Is that what a Cuban cafecito is?
Yes. A Cuban coffee is an espresso with a lot of sugar. And then a cortadito is you just put a little bit of steamed milk on top. And that's coffee for us as we know it. So in the 60s, when my family arrived to LA, it was light roast, a watery type of American style coffee that didn't make sense for us. So we were seeking products that we wanted to make for ourselves, having been in the coffee business ourselves. And it was really my grandfather's dream to get back into the coffee business. And so slowly, in a very humble way, we started in an 1,100 square foot space here in Los Angeles. My grandfather discovered an opportunity to buy a roaster from Bob's Big Boy restaurants. If you remember the restaurant chain, there's still a few around. So at that time, as you were mentioning, grocery stores and restaurants roast their own coffee. However, another roaster had taken over their coffee business, and so it created an opportunity for us to buy the roaster, and that's how we started. And just learning about, trying to first cater to the Cuban community, but then also LA is made up of so many wonderful ethnic groups, that really love coffee. So we started learning about the Vietnamese community, and they have a strong appreciation for high quality dark roast French roast coffee. And so we started catering to that community, and also the Middle East community in Los Angeles. They have a very specific blend that they like, and different roasts, and, blending after roasting. And so we started catering to them as well. And then, the gourmet coffee revolution took place in the 1980s, and that really created an opportunity for us to enter the American coffee market and launch single origin coffees, blends, flavored coffees under our Don Francisco's brand, which is now today our flagship brand, named after my grandfather in his honor.
Now, I have to say, where are these going to be available? Can people find a bag that looks just like this at their favorite grocery store?
So you can, if you live in the West Coast, you can probably find it in any grocery store. And we're in different pockets of the East, but definitely it's available every day on Amazon, on Target.com, and also Walmart.com. We also have our own website, donfranciscos.com, and we have a fun coffee club if you're interested in joining that as well. So I would invite you to try our coffee and just, celebrate coffee every day as we do.
I love that. Now, I've been making this French press, and I'm going to bring this around. And this is the great moment. This is like pouring a Guinness in a sense. Like there's this moment where the luscious, dark liquid reveals itself. And so what I'm doing essentially is I'm pressing the grounds that have collected and coalesced at the top of this ring here. You can almost see the way that has collected. And what I'm going to do is gently push this down, and you're going to see how the color changes. And at the top, we are collecting this marvelous, dark, rich coffee. This is our breakfast blend. Go ahead.
Yes. No, I also love the French press because it's basically combining like two different brew methods to brew the coffee. So first you steep the coffee with water. And so you're extracting some complexities in the coffee that you may not get through a regular, just, pour over filtered coffee process. So because of it's what we call full immersion brewing, so that you let the coffee steep, and then with the mesh metal filter, then you filter out the grounds. So the result is a strong, complex, delicious cup of coffee. The only thing I don't like about it is cleaning it.
Well, we're going to take a sip of this.
I'll join you too.
And it's going to beg the question. Oh, that's so good. That is so good. And what I've done is I've got my room temperature version, and it really changes its character and complexity depending on whether you're serving it cold, like an iced coffee,
yes,
room temperature like I am for pairing with food, or hot in the traditional.
It does. Even the temperature that you use to brew the coffee impacts the flavor. So cold brew tends to be sweeter and be less acidic. And you're right, the temperature does impact the flavor. The pronunciation of the acidity in the coffee changes as it gets cooler. So you're spot on.
This has been so much fun. I want to make sure that we can continue our conversation. Why is it that brewing coffee, or a fresh, open package of coffee, is one of the best, most alluring smells in human existence? Is there like a coffee pheromone or something? Is there something you're not telling us about?
I mean, it really is God's gift. And we're so happy to be, this is our gift to the world, to be able to, buy the best coffees, roast them with a lot of care, a lot of love. This is what we do. This is the only thing that we do. And it's really our purpose in the world. And we're so happy to enjoy it with you and share it with you.
So the question becomes, in the morning, is there a traditional toast or a house toast for the Don Francisco family, the Gaviña family, that you share with friends when you clink your glasses together or your cups together?
Yes, we always say salud.
Salud.
Salud, to your health. Salud.
Well, I love that. Lisette Gaviña Lopez, thank you so much for making this possible for us to have our Coffee 101 today. I am completely sold on my double French. And I want to remind people that this is just the beginning. Think about how you can take your favorite coffees and pair them with foods and different flavors. We didn't have enough time to start getting into it, but honestly, I could have done 4 hours today as a masterclass about how I pair different kinds of coffee and how you can make cocktails with this, because the bitter note in this really plays nicely and substitutes for alcohol. So if you wanted to create a non or low alcohol by volume cocktail or beverage, you can substitute that rich, really astringent-y, bitter, ripe, bold flavor in a lot of preparations. It wears things like tonic more beautifully than you think. It pairs with fruit in ways that you can't possibly imagine until you start tasting it. So I love that you've given us permission to start exploring, and I hope everybody begins with a package of the Don Francisco. Thank you for this.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's a pleasure to be with you and share our story. Thank you.
Well, this was great fun. Thank you so much. Will you come back and visit again?
Anytime. We can do the 4-hour session anytime you like. Like, I can go on and on about coffee.
I know that sounds intimidating, but I do want to invite you to come and be on our Food and Beverage Magazine Clubhouse Club. I don't know if you're on Clubhouse, but Food and Beverage Magazine has one of the biggest food clubs on Clubhouse. And
wonderful.
It's a social media platform that's spoken word. It's just like having TED Talks and talk shows and coffee clatches all at the same time. And we'd love to have you come and join us on one of those as well.
Count me in.
Cheers.
Salud. Cheers.
The legacy stretches back more than 140 years at this point.
There's so many people whose livelihood depend on coffee, and it's a labor of love.
For 4 generations, the family has stayed true to its roots in coffee. The future has to look back at the past. We always have to stay true to who we are.
My life in Cuba was very nice. Our family started this business in a very humble way. Actually, our grandfather planting coffee in the fields. We had to leave Cuba in 1960 for political reasons. So we did. We ended up in Los Angeles. We have family here. And finally, in 1967, we purchased a small roaster and a grinder and started selling coffee for the Cuban community. And guess what? America is a lot bigger than Cuban coffee by far. And that's what we've been doing since then.
We go out of our way to make sure that our customers, they get the best quality that is obtainable, and that's how we were able to grow the business.
Our employees are as much part of our family as we are. We have grown old together, and we have had families together.
I've always felt that the Gaviña family treats us, the employees, just like that, like we are family.
It makes it a pleasure to work here.
This business has been based on a culture of tradition and family values. That's something that's very dear to my heart.
It's an exciting time. All of our brands are strong and they're healthy, and the potential for these brands is even greater.
Looking into the future, we have to look at whatever will be good for the farmer, will be good for the roaster, and will be good for the end consumer.
So we try to not have a negative impact on the environment and kind of create a positive one.
From the people, the products, the brands, it's just an amazing place to be.
We went through Cuba Independence War, we went through the revolution in Cuba, and we are 50 years later still in business. So I think we're going to be easy the next 50.
And when you put it all together, that's what great coffee looks like.
Whether you are thinking about becoming a restaurateur or you are already in the business, Michael Politz has written a must-read, The Food and Beverage Magazine's Guide to Restaurant Success. Pick up your copy today at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Books A Million, or wherever fine books are sold.
Need a push getting your emerging spirits, wine, or beverage brand into the hands of consumers? Interested in winning a double gold award? Proof Awards, the ultimate beverage competition where all judges are beverage buyers, can jumpstart your campaign. Enter the Proof Awards. It's time to get your spirits, wines, and cocktail mixers the attention they deserve. Take advantage of the Proof Awards exposure and marketing program with Food and Beverage Magazine. It's all about putting your bottle into the right hands. Your brands will be tasted and rated by judges that are all beverage buyers for bars, nightclubs, resorts, casinos, liquor stores, big box retail, and many beverage distributors from across the U.S. Enter your spirits, wine, or beverage brand today. Hundreds of categories to choose from. One simple way to sign up. Visit www.proofawards.com. That's www.proofawards.com. And follow the Enter portal into our competition.